Hello, I'm Emilie Bellet, founder of Vestpod and author of You're Not Broke, You're Pre-Rich, and you're listening to The Wallet. Every week we bring you the best tips, guidance, and a good dose of motivation to help you manage your money better. This week, we challenge a core assumption in personal finance, that everyone manages money in the same way. My guest, behavioural finance expert Krystle McGilvery, explores money and neurodivergence from ADHD to broader cognitive diversity. We unpack why financial systems often fail, how time blindness and money avoidance create real risk, and why the focus should shift from fixing behavior to designing systems that actually work. This episode is about building a way of managing money that fits how people really think. Remember that we are not certified financial advisors. Information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. Please tell me what you do, who you are.
Krystle McGilvery, all the letters, as I like to say. I'm a chartered accountant and behavioural finance expert, I say. My specialism is basically the psychology behind decision-making, and I apply it to finance because I know that's where it's needed. And also I do speaking, amongst other stuff, but in a nutshell, that's me.
I'd love today to talk about how financial systems work and why we don't all fit within this system. So what we can do in terms of behaviors and actions to make sure we save, we invest, and we're financially secure. So most financial systems are built for people who think in a linear and really organized way. What does that look like in practice?
When we think of people who are really structured, have a 9 to 5 from the age of 22 up until retirement, whatever the starting age of work is. They have one job, they work for, I don't know if we can mention brands, but say BT, and they've been there for years and years. Financial systems are built for those people, which means those of us who maybe have a portfolio career or are looking to become parents and want to take time off work, which obviously puts a break in their financials. The financial systems that exist do not support that. And then also on the other side, when we talk about matters around neurodivergence and how we operate, and maybe for example, me, I have a terrible memory, or a heavy reliance on things such as Google Calendar to get by, and financial systems haven't quite caught up with those differences. So that can, of course, create a bunch of problems when it comes to our money.
But if we start with maybe misunderstood financial behaviors, what do you see with some of your maybe ADHD or neurodivergent clients?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I remember having a conversation with a financial advisor who was really stressed about, this client is not replying to me, or, we had a great conversation, I sent them the paperwork and they haven't come back, and financial avoidance. And that, to say the financial advisor or the rest of us, they look scatty, irresponsible, not serious about their money. But actually, maybe it's a threat response and the negative emotions they may be feeling when it comes to sorting out their finances, or maybe that's connected to some kind of money story, with their upbringing. You don't know what's underneath. So, for example, that person looks terrible, but actually they're reacting normally, right? But the financial systems that exist and the way that processes work, that doesn't support
work.
No.
Yeah.
Then we've got, like I just mentioned, lack of memory, forgetfulness, or we could talk about impulse spending is a common one when we talk about ADHD. And again, it's perceived very negatively, and it is problematic at times, right? Because if you're spending what you want to be saving, that's a problem. But again, it's maybe emotional regulation. You're feeling a certain way and you're spending to feel better, or vice versa, because you feel so good and you're celebrating. Like I celebrated yesterday, bought myself flowers, very impulsively, but, not as severe on the bank. But yeah.
And I was thinking maybe time blindness or, out of sight, out of mind. That will then create financial risk and not just inconvenience.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, if you before you know it, how much time has gone by and you haven't done the thing you were supposed to do, or you've ignored the subscription you should have ended after 28 days.
That you've been paying for
Absolutely.
years or a month of years.
Totally.
I see that very often in our, boot camps and workshops. It's not even thinking about saving or organizing your finances. It's really looking at your bank account, looking at, any number, using any apps, and you feel, I just can't do it.
Yeah, it's the same. When I work with people one-on-one, we start where they are, of course, and a lot of people are at that place where it's, I've got to look at my bank. And some people, I have several sessions before we can actually get to that point, because we've got to go through this process of creating safety when it comes to their money. So like I said earlier, many people have money stories, have had experiences when it comes to money, and you're just protecting yourself. Maybe you've made big mistakes in the past and it hasn't been dealt with properly. So you're still holding that, right? And then, outside of that, of course, the way some systems work, you really struggle with, forget the money story, you just struggle with the way systems are requiring you to interact with money. And that creates overwhelm and stress, of course. So then you do the right thing and you'd avoid it to protect yourself. But that can, of course, create, a load of problems when it comes to saving for, your pension or, etc.
And do you think some of the, I don't know, maybe apps are helping people, or there's still this barrier of, subscribing, linking your bank account and stuff like that?
So there are loads of apps, right? And if I think about my clients, they've tried loads of apps and many of them are just not hitting the nail on the head. And I say that, and I want to step back a bit, because what we need to remember is when we talk about neurodivergence, there's a range, right? We're all different. So, for example, I'm great at math, but some who are dyslexic or, are not great at math. So it's not a blanket solution. But yeah, of course, the apps aren't perfect. And what's required is much more tailoring and accommodating to people's differences. And then, apps matching that. But there are some interesting things that apps are doing, especially when we talk about automation and separating money, that are good.
So when we talk about money avoidance, shame can play a big role. So how does that create maybe this negative spiral?
Yeah, shame is a really big one. So when we think about shame, what I understand is happening is, instead of you seeing a mistake you've made, maybe you've dipped into your savings that you had for a property in the future, or you've gone into your overdraft and you've been charged. Instead of you seeing it as, I made that mistake, okay, better next time, you maybe take that on as, I am bad at money. So then it becomes your identity, and it becomes bigger than a passing mistake that you can go about and fix. So now you've got this identity that you're bad at money. And I think we spoke about this when we was on the panel. And if that's your identity, what you're then going to do is continue behaving accordingly. Why would you not? That's who you are as far as you're concerned. So then that means you're going to continue with that behavior and stay in that kind of shame, negative, unhelpful behavior space. And that just spirals. And then, saving, investing, money management starts to become so much harder.
So what are the first steps you can take when you see yourself in this situation? Like you're scared, you don't want to, take the first step or the first action?
Yeah, I think what seems to really land with people is the reframing. And I remember, before I started doing this work, so about 10 years ago, I was like, what is this? Just words. It doesn't mean anything. But actually, it really helps put things into perspective. So, whether it's thinking about you and your relationship with money as simply learned behaviors, or, like I said, a result of, your money story, and you've just attached to these actions and habits, and they're just being built into you, but it's not you. You are still fully capable of making changes. I think I said it the other day. If you don't like the behavior, change the conditions, and that's what it is. And when we think about changing behavior, you're thinking about your environment as well. Who are you talking to about money? What's their view on money? How is that impacting you? So, in terms of the first step, I think it's reframing and kind of loosening the rigidity around, I'm bad at money. Yeah. No, actually, maybe there's other things going on here that is impacting what I'm doing with my finances.
Yeah, so seeing it a bit broadly than just maybe money and finances. But I love this idea of changing your environment. And I think it works in business, personal life. It's trying to see something that's slightly bigger. But sometimes we are in our, little world. We also don't want to disappoint people around us. So always seeing the same people. So how do you sometimes step out or step up?
It's the hardest thing. And literally on the way down here, I was talking to a friend about she's going through changes in terms of her view and realizing that actually her environment and the people she's around is a real big part of that.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult thing to
really
realize because this is what you're used to, right? But even down to, I don't know, say you're in business, we talk about the business owners, say you have done the traditional thing for a while, you had, a job and, you've got friends from university and you decide to become self-employed. You're the crazy person. And that journey is likely going to be quite difficult in the beginning. And when you're having your doubts about money and earning and income and pricing, your immediate circle don't understand that. But there are things you can do and you can be reinforced and supported if you have the right people around you. So, for someone who is struggling with their finances and feeling quite isolated maybe and not knowing how to change it, look at your platform and just going to spaces where there are people who are comfortable talking about money. That's a whole nother topic. But where you can air those challenges or ask those questions and the conversation of money becomes normal.
Yeah.
That's the first step, I think.
No, I love it. And until you find maybe your circle or your network, as you say, it's even trying to find mentors online. I mean, we often think about, I need to have a mentor. We have access to like so much information online now. So it's finding those people who are, educating you. Making sure you follow the right people. But I think there's so much you can learn.
There is, and I know that itself is quite overwhelming for many because there's a lot of people online talking about finance. And I guess if I was to give a word of encouragement for someone who is looking for support from a finance expert online, one, make sure you're comfortable with them. Yeah. Because, everybody's got their own approach as to how they talk about money and talk to you. If you are someone who's quite nervous, make sure it's someone who's making you feel safe and comfortable. And then the harder part, I think, is ask those difficult questions up front around, what you may feel is a silly question, get it out and see how you feel with that person, addressing that question, as opposed to you're now afraid to ask questions. Yeah. You want to get that out in the open, and ideally you're with someone who's going to be like, that's not a silly question, let's deal with it. Yeah.
And I think the same works for financial coaches, advisors, is making sure you are comfortable in the room.
Absolutely.
And that's your space. I mean, you're the client, so you should be able to ask these difficult questions. We tend to optimize for convenience, but sometimes removing friction make financial behaviors worse. So how do we approach this and knowing that we sometimes also have to face the reality of our finances?
Yeah, it's a nice question, actually. So convenience initially is, automation. I scream about that all the time. It's you set it up once and you can forget about it. That's it. I'm investing or I'm saving or, I'm moving my money via a standing order from one account to another on the second of the month. It's great. But I think one of the key areas where it easily is problematic is, tapping to pay, for example. And I remember speaking about this a few years ago on ITV, but there was a study years ago and it looks at, we call it the pain of paying, right? And I think I'm sure you've heard of it, but our brain literally fires up in the same area of physical pain when you pay with cash compared to when you pay with card, which is phenomenal. And it's why we love it so much, because it's easier. There's less of a negative response in our brain when we're tapping away. But of course, that's the out of sight, out of mind, right? You now can't see what's happening with your finances. You don't know how much you've got left. Should you be spending that? Yeah, now, because we just tap to pay for things, we've totally removed the pain of paying. We just spend money freely.
Is there a way on our phones to try to sort of like ring fence or add boundaries around our spending without feeling that like it's too restrictive.
Yeah, absolutely. I scream about automations, and you can be so creative with it. So whether it's separating your money into different accounts or different pots, accounts is ideal because it's so much cleaner, right? I know pots exist, but some of them still require quite a bit of human interaction on a regular basis, which is, but yeah, separating things into different pots, and even deleting those apps off your phone. So, if you need to be extreme, delete the Google Pay or the Apple Pay, fine. If not, maybe have the card that exists there be the card that you can have your free flowing spending. It's not the same account that you're paying your house bills from. And maybe linking that to having a standing order where you're maybe moving money every week into that account if you
sort
need
of
to.
prepay into this account.
Absolutely. So instead of having a full month budget for fun time, you've got a weekly payment going every 7 days. Then you can relax completely. And ideally, you'd have an account that doesn't have an overdraft. So taking away all that requirement of decision making, so you're less likely to get into problems.
Yeah. When we think about someone who's neurodivergent or doesn't think they don't fit in the system, and we want for them to build this like dream financial system, where should they start?
I think one that is maybe quite easy to set up is to have several bank accounts maybe and split your money every month. You can do that with a standing order. So you can move money between your own accounts quite easily. But maybe have a savings account. You've got your investment pot. You've got an account for your regular bills. And you've got another account for your fun time money. That way, you don't have to think so much about, can I spend from this account? Absolutely, because it's fun time money.
Yeah, great. So you have your current account, maybe your emergency fund, another saving account for, your goals and dreams. And then you can move into other products, so maybe long-term, pensions, maybe stocks and share ISA, if you want to build up for the future.
Yes.
This episode is sponsored by Wealthify. Want to start investing but not sure where to begin, or perhaps you don't have the time to manage it yourself? Well, Wealthify makes it simple by choosing and managing your investments for you. And if you deposit or transfer into their stocks and share ISA, you could earn between £50 and £1,000 in cashback. Open your account at wealthify.com. Terms and conditions and minimum investments apply. Registration closes on the 31st of May 2026. With investing, your capital is at risk. Wealthify is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. When we talk about automation, so automation works really well. You can have everything on autopilot. But can this create dangerous blind spots?
When I think of automations, I think of saving, investing, moving money around different accounts. And initially, that's great. You don't have to think about it. You know, especially where you've got a set income, then that's wonderful. But where you may have an emergency and you've had to spend more than you anticipated, or say you've got irregular income, that's where it can be a bit more tricky. I mean, there are creative things you could do around that. One thing I talk to my business owners about is paying themselves a set amount every month, regardless of how much they're earning. Obviously, in the ideal world, you're still, earning, and you've got a good business that's, doing well. But, instead of when you've got a high income month, you're not paying yourself more in that period and things like that. But I guess where your financial life is not traditional, then yes, it can be a bit more tricky.
Yeah.
Every month, this is what I get, this is where it goes, then, it falls down.
Yeah. And you're talking about earning, actually. That's really interesting. So I'd love to know how neurodivergence shapes maybe earning patterns, pricing, negotiation. Because if you avoid the topic of money altogether, it must be really hard to actually ask for more, know your worth and stuff like that.
Absolutely. It plays a large role. So if we focus on negotiation and having those conversations at work, many people suffer from rejection sensitivity, where they are not comfortable having those difficult conversations where there might be a no, or there might be you have to kind of go backwards and forwards and fight your corner a little bit. Many avoid that and don't like it, period. Furthermore, when it relates to money as well. And that can create so much problems. I delivered a session yesterday talking about negotiation, actually. And one thing I mentioned is we talk about the genders, men and women, and women are less likely to negotiate their starting salary. And as you can imagine, the compound effect of that, if you're not negotiating to start with, and then maybe you're not negotiating as hard or at all, as you progress in your career, you've just left so much money on the table. So kind of bringing it back to the question around neurodivergence, same thing. You suffer as a consequence of not having that conversation. Again, leaning over to maybe a business owner when it comes to pricing your products and services, when we talk about self-worth, how much, somebody feels they're worthy of earning. And maybe, again, if you struggle with some of the challenging traits around your neurodivergence, and you're now pivoting into business and you're thinking, oh, but I've not done so well here, or I've made a mistake here, or I'm not as good here, then that might then spill over into your finances and the prices you quote. And of course, that affects your bank balance. And we could continue the same conversation around the other things we spoke about. Yeah.
That's really interesting because you're sort of, that's going to have an impact on, of course, your savings, your earnings. I mean, do you think you can sort of coach yourself to go and ask for more? Do you need external help? Maybe any practical tips that people can apply, whether they're business owners or maybe self-employed or negotiating their next pay.
When I talk about negotiation or just building confidence, I like to remind people that as much as we look at somebody and say, that person is so confident, that's not actually how it works. It's they are confident in that specific situation. And I think that loosens the idea of confidence for individuals and reminding them that they got there through practice and they pushed through that uncomfortable barrier. And that's the blocker, right? That fear, that discomfort you feel, the stress, the sweating, the nerves, the shaking. They likely felt the same thing, but they pushed through. So for someone who is avoiding negotiating or booking that meeting with their manager to have a conversation about the job title change or whatever it might be, in those early days, yes, it's going to feel really uncomfortable. Yeah. And I said this on the panel, didn't I? You're not going to die. Is the phrase that
you think so sometimes?
You think so, absolutely. But it's a reminder, you're not going to. Yeah. You're going to feel really not great, but you've done it. And now you've built up more evidence to show that actually I could do that again. Yeah. And I would come out the other end intact. And it's about kind of just working on that habit to make it more normal. And I say that from experience. If I was to just share briefly, I'm an accountant, right? The typical traditional accountant. I sat behind an Excel spreadsheet and was afraid to speak up in any meetings. Yeah. My voice was very weak and meek and I'm a completely different person. But yeah, I quit and started my own business and realized that I had to speak. And I went and did the work to push through that, even down to writing my first article on LinkedIn. I remember pressing post of running away from the computer. So it's just kind of an example to show that you can push through those nerves of stating a higher price, requesting a higher salary, wanting a different bonus structure, and remembering that when we're talking about employment, your remuneration package is not just about your pay. There are other elements that, can be included when it comes to securing a good contract with an employer.
Pensions, part-time, whatever you want.
Hybrid.
In your contract. Yeah. But that's so important. I love your point about, pushing through. And I think in all these, interviews of people who are, building these businesses and stuff, that's something that always comes back is the resilience, is the hard part. And it's always harder. I mean, it's the same for, Vestpod and speaking and stuff. It's like maybe, bigger audiences you don't know. I think it's this fear of, rejection.
Absolutely.
That's really hard. So it's training, an ongoing process.
Training.
Yeah. If we go back to these employees, so where, for people who are neurodivergent, in traditional work structures that sometimes penalizes them. How does that show up financially?
I think one is the first point we made around, if we think about negotiating, and that maybe being, you do it less, you avoid it. So you're leaving money on the table is the phrase that I haven't used for a while. That's the workplace and all the other benefits you could get from work, right? Then there's also the management side. So what you do with that money, whether it's, capitalizing on what your employer is going to contribute to your pensions. Have you taken advantage of that? Have you done that work to make those decisions, or have you avoided it completely and you're missing out?
And you're really not on your own if you've been avoiding it, because to be honest, a lot of people I talk to, boot camps and stuff, they've just been ignoring the topic because they don't feel confident and stuff. So don't feel you're on your own if you've left
it's normal, but we don't want it.
It's normal, but we don't want it, and we're fighting it. But it's it's quite normal.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing, because I can't remember what I was talking about before, but it was, it's available to you.
Yes.
That I remember what I was talking about. Yes, it's available to you. And many people don't want to be a burden or take advantage or be a problem, and say, actually, can we up my contribution or whatever the change may be, because you're kind of grateful that I've got a job here and I don't want to be a nuisance. But actually it's there. It's for you. And, again, I'm just thinking about an article that I wrote recently, and, training, whether, that training could, of course, help you in your current job role and progress your career. And if you're to think quite smartly about your career, your next job could benefit from the training that this company paid for, there are so many areas where it can be impacted, but they can be worked on.
Yeah. So financial inclusion often focuses on access and education. But now, what is missed when cognitive diversity is ignored?
When I think about kind of corporates doing financial education or bringing in those, often they come in with the solution of, this is what we're going to teach you. This is the platform. And it doesn't actually involve the people there. So their differences, the diversity that exists within that space hasn't been accounted for in the way it's delivered, in the topics that are required sometimes. And also, I think maybe two others, one around the body doubling or just the community aspect, but actually also the environment. So, and this is kind of why I went into the psychology side of money. Often financial education dives in with, this is what you need to do, go and do it.
Yes.
But that doesn't necessarily work, because there are so many other factors involved in that individual that impacts what they do with their money. So these financial educations and access solutions are not making sure that they can actually take advantage of this great content, because they haven't thought about what else is going on with them.
So is it doing more discussions, conversations, also peer-to-peer learning? Do you believe in?
Yeah, peer-to-peer learning is great. I think I love a workshop where it's kind of rough around the edges. We're just sitting there having a chat and everyone can express and, feels really comfortable, and it's not as formal, because I think money is already formal and intimidating. But if we can just get comfortable and just share and then chip in with our suggestions and solutions. But I think even just as simple as bringing in outside factors into the conversation. So it not being isolated on, this is the bank account I have, I don't have pensions, but actually broadening that discussion, broadening the influencing factors. Okay, what's your home life like? Is your partner on board with you improving your finances? Are they on board with your bigger financial plan? Do you have responsibility of your parents? Do you send money back to your home country? What are all those other factors that impact what happens at the end of the day with your money?
So how do we move? I mean, you've talked about that, but how do we move from fixing the person to maybe designing better systems?
First, accepting and understanding that just pure education is not the answer. And those that are providing the solutions or trying to create the solutions, it's for them to bring in the users, bring in the people that are going to be, trying to improve their finances off the back of the products that are provided, and broaden that conversation around, like we said, environment, other factors, what would work for you. And and maybe creating solutions that have diversity brought into them. As opposed to, back to the ideal app that we were designing. If there was one that could, you could pick and choose how it works for you, that would be great.
Are there areas that people may be missing when they're neurodivergent and then they're maybe wasting or losing money?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've touched on a few. I think back to the pension conversation, maybe where you're avoiding having that conversation with your employer about topping up your pensions, you're missing out on pension contribution, and which you're saving for retirement. Maybe if you're avoiding your bank account, you're missing out on keeping more money in your account because you've got subscriptions that have continued and you're not using them anymore. I know I'm sometimes guilty of that, actually. Yeah, and I think definitely around impulse spending, of course, we're impacting our savings pot, and a really silly one, actually. Just thinking more broadly around neurodivergence and maybe forgetfulness. I'm guilty of this. I forget to do my regular weekly shop at my grocery store online to get the big order. And that means I'm going to my local Tesco's and paying so much more for the same thing because it's more expensive. And maybe one other is not doing your work, your research to make sure you've optimized the type of account you have, whether it's an ISA account and making sure you're changing every year to take advantage of the bonus rate, and things like that.
And finally, if we close on that, what are the long-term financial consequences when systems are not designed for how someone actually thinks?
Yeah, if we look at stats around women in business or women generally, if we focus there, combine that with neurodivergence, it just creates a group of people who the gap widens, basically, a group of people who suffer more as a result. And those who are, at an advantage when it comes to finances, maybe if we focus on the cis white male and maybe, inheritance or it just creates a widening gap and that negatively impacts the economy, right? Then your propensity to pay and your purchasing power is impacted. This conversation, this part could go really big. But on a ground level, people just suffer financially and it affects health and stress, which affects us as humans, right? In our day-to-day.
Great, Krystle, thank you. Let's move to quick-fire questions.
Okay, let's do it.
One financial system that works for people who struggle with consistency.
I'd want to say the automation piece. If you're not consistent checking your accounts, but yeah, I think that might be good.
One tool or workaround that actually reduces friction in money management.
Maybe separating your money reduces friction. Yeah, because when you think about your finances and what needs to be done, there's just so much to sort out, right? And it's like, how much do I need where? But I guess if you've got something that puts money in the right place, then that's sorted.
Great. And the biggest misconception about how people manage money when they do not fit the default model?
That there's something wrong with them. I think that they are not serious about their lives or, money and being stable and self-sufficient. I think, we tend to view those people as you're not serious, whereas actually there's maybe other things going on that the system is not supporting them with.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Thank you for joining us on The Wallet. You get subscribed on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We also share short clips on social media at Vestpod, and you will find the key takeaways and resources from this episode at vestpod.com. If you'd like to go deeper, subscribe to the Vestpod newsletter via the links in the show notes for practical money insights, episode summaries, and updates on upcoming events.